very much. Mr Chairman, Minister, Ambassador, guests, I am delighted that I got an introduction as a former Minister, because I lasted 7 weeks on the last occasion, but we might do a bit better on the next. But it's actually very much in sync with political accountability and transparency of decision making and all those lovely buzzwords. You now have somebody in front of you that has seen it all before and seen it in action. Exactly 1 year ago, the leader of the Fine Gael party made a speech here to this conference in this school entitled "A New Politics for a New Society." And in that speech, Mr Kenny argued passionately for radical change to our political system. And the fundamental truth, he said, is this: that our political system is broken, that our political culture is discredited, and we cannot fix our economy or create a just society unless and until we also fix our politics. So the government and certain sections of the media want you to believe that all politicians are the same and that no political party has the courage or the determination to fix our broken political system. So I'm here to tell you that you're 100% wrong, and this is the reason why. In March of this year, Fine Gael published a new politics document, the only political party with a radical set of proposals to deal with political reform since the 1930s. So a lot of work has gone into it, a lot of research, a lot of consultation, and it's still a document that has, I think, stood the test of the last few months. We are also the only party that has a front-bench member dealing with political reform. So I want to say here this evening that the new politics document is not an optional extra for Fine Gael. It's central to our party's vision for the transformation of Ireland and will be one of the key planks on which Fine Gael will fight the next general election. Some have argued that political reform in Ireland should not be a priority, that our collective energies would be better devoted to rescuing our economy and creating the tens of thousands of jobs that are necessary and that our people so desperately need. But the economy must, of course, be our number one priority. And Enda Kenny will address those matters later in the week. But however, we are convinced that real political reform is also essential for the reasons that I want to set out. We believe that political failure lies at the heart of Ireland's economic collapse. You can't fix one without fixing the other. The biggest political failure belongs, of course, I would say this to Minister Martin, the government. The two most recent banking reports make it very clear that the causes of the recession, contrary to the collapse of the Lehman Brothers Bank, were mostly domestic and carry the logo "Made in Ireland." It was government policy that ensured that the banking crisis was not dealt with before it was too late, but it is also government policy which ensured that the interests of the banks and their investors, once the crisis was upon us, were given priority over the citizens of this country. Unfortunately, several key witnesses in Ireland's political system facilitated these failures, and in particular, we have one of the most centralised states in Europe, built around a system of government which has few, if any, real checks and balances. We have an executive with so much power that it can and does largely ignore the Dáil. We have a permanent government composed of senior civil servants and members of state agencies, which is largely unaccountable to anyone. And finally, we have an outdated budget and fiscal system that makes it extremely difficult to manage the state's finances properly. It's one of the great ironies of Irish history that while our people rejected British rule, the British Westminster model of government was retained in this country with very little change. However, if the last decade of misrule has proven anything, it is that modern Ireland cannot be governed effectively by a system originally designed for 19th century Britain. So what are the key changes that the new politics document would like to introduce? Firstly, we'll ask the people in a referendum whether they will wish to have a unicameral chamber by abolishing the Seanad. As part of that same referendum, we would also ask the Irish people to approve of a series of changes to other institutions of the state. For example, we want to create a new civil court of appeal and to allow Irish citizens living abroad to vote in presidential elections. Secondly, we want to fundamentally reform the Dáil. We reform the Dáil committee system so that it can truly hold the government to account, completely modernise the budget system and change the way that legislation is passed to make it much more efficient and responsive. We also introduce a petition system to allow the people to have direct access to have their concerns directly considered by the Dáil, similar to the European Parliament. Thirdly, we would like to pass legislation to strengthen freedom of information, to register all lobbyists, to protect whistleblowers in the private and public sector, and to allow the Standards and Public Office Commission to launch its own investigations rather than reacting to complaints presently. We'd also like to introduce a series of reforms to strengthen local government and give it a real role in the running of this state. Fine Gael believes that power must be devolved so that decisions about local services are taken as close as possible to the people. That's what we signed up for in the Lisbon Treaty, and that's why we signed up in the principle of subsidiarity. However, that doesn't mean that in the era of modern communication that we need the same level of administration. We recognise that the political reform could be seen as an elite project controlled by a bunch of political insiders. And to prevent this happening, we believe that it is absolutely vital that citizens of Ireland are actively involved in helping set the agenda on political reform. To facilitate that, we are proposing to establish a citizens' assembly, similar to assemblies that were used in Canada and the Netherlands. The assembly, which will be composed of 100 citizens who reflect the broad demographics of Ireland, will be asked to consider what reforms should be made over and above the specific changes that Fine Gael proposes to make. In particular, it will be asked to make recommendations on how the electoral system might be reformed. Since the New Politics was published earlier this year, the feedback has been positive. There is an appetite for political reform. There have been, of course, some who have disagreed with us on parts of detail. And Fine Gael is certainly willing to take constructive criticism on board and to feed this process through the Citizens' Assembly. Some commentators have queried whether we need constitutional change as part of political reform, since it is possible to make changes to the political system through legislation, so why bother with constitutional change? Our answer to that, we need to do both. We will use legislation to effect change where that approach makes best sense, and use constitutional change in other cases. It is, of course, at the end of the day, impossible to abolish the Shannon, for example, without constitutional change. Other changes to the institution of the presidency, for instance, are also only possible with constitutional change by referenda. People have queried whether political reform will really make a meaningful difference going forward. While I can understand this scepticism, given the huge failures that we have seen and witnessed over the last number of years, I genuinely believe we can and must create a much better system. We can prevent future governments from behaving recklessly with the state's finances by reforming the budget system and by requiring them to abide by certain key fiscal rules. We can end crony government in Ireland by opening up government and giving the Dáil, for the first time in its history, real power to hold ministers and public bodies to account. For example, it doesn't make sense that with a budget of 16 billion that the Health Service Executive, through the Minister for Health, cannot even answer a Dáil question. We can make our public sector and our system of government much more efficient by reversing the massive centralisation of power in Ireland. Perhaps one of the strangest reactions to New Politics has been from my good friend Michael McDowell. Michael, you may remember, was the man who argued strenuously for the abolition of the Senate some years ago, condemning it as nothing more than a convalescent home and creche. But it's interesting to see that Michael has now become establishment and a staunch defender of the existing bicameral system. So he was either completely wrong in his PD days or he's completely wrong now. So he might tell you during the week. No one in Fine Gael is suggesting that political reform by itself is a panacea for all that ails our country. It's a contribution towards resolving some of the problems that we have. But our problems are too big and too serious for that. We believe that political reform must be part of the solution. It also helps to restore trust in politics and trust in the institutions of the Republic. A recent survey showed that trust in government in Ireland is now one of the lowest in Europe. A figure stands at 28% in Ireland compared to an EU average of 43%. There is a real danger that if the justifiable anger of our citizens is not addressed through positive reform, an increasing number of our citizens will disengage completely from the democratic process. This cannot be allowed to happen, and I think as Democrats we have to make sure, and the citizens, that it doesn't happen. That's why we are putting political reform firmly on the political agenda. There cannot be any such proposition that after 90 years of national self-rule and 112 years of local government, that our governance structures at local and national level should remain the same and that are satisfactory for a modern Ireland. I don't think so. Fine Gael doesn't think so, and we're serious about political reform. Thank you very much.